I'm going to have a quick discussion on how to get the red glow from the gauges that you can see here. I know it confused a lot of people what exactly they were looking at that was different, but we've got the red glow now. So let me take the cover off and we'll talk about it. This is a GT1, GT2 supervision gauge cluster. This is relevant for GT1, GT2, the 3.5 or the 7-inch. It's a very simple mod. It's very straightforward. Hardest part will be the fact that you have to have the cluster out. If you're doing the supervision swap in a GT, then you will probably have a cluster like this that you're going to be putting in anyways. So after you get it variant coded and get your mileage all straightened out, you could take this step to make a little bit of a modification. Now, I just put this one back together, so I'm not going to take it back apart. It's not hard as much as it is. This is the 4th or 5th time I've done it. So, what we're going to do is talk about how easy it is. So, the modification requires pulling these needles off. To do that, you're going to use the old spoon trick. 2 plastic spoons, preferably plastic. We're trying not to mar up the surface. The surface, if you scratch it, it just doesn't look very good anymore. 2 plastic spoons will work well. If you have to use metal spoons, fine. Put a piece of painter's tape underneath where you're going to be prying so that these do not make contact with the gauge faces. But for this example, I'll just show you what to do. Put your spoon underneath the edge, make sure you're directly across from each other and pry up. And the needle will pop off, probably hit you in the face. So be prepared for that. It would not be a bad idea to set a towel over the screen so that your needle can't fall and somehow manage to damage it, but you'll pop it off. Now, when you get this off, let me grab this other gauge cluster. When you pull off your needles, you will be left with something like this. What we're going to be looking at and focusing on here is this white lip that sticks out. You see there's 2 of them. There's one for RPM, there's one for coolant, there's one for speed, and one for the fuel. So the way the needles sit on there and do their thing is that on the center of those, center of underneath here, is red LEDs. The red LEDs bleed through this opaque little section here. Come on. They bleed through there and they light up the needle, and that's how you get your pretty little red. Now you can see there's a bit of a dish effect here. There we go. You can see it's got a little bit of a depth to it. That depth sits over top of that white ring, and it keeps that red from bleeding out through the sides. So what I did, and I'd recommend you doing this if you are a fond fan of red, is pull your 4 needles off. Now, when you pull the needles off, they're going to be in a set position. You can take painter's tape and mark the position. This one is really not super important because it is free-flowing. So there is a stop at 0 here because this is pulse driven, so the more pulses, just the higher it floats up. So it actually does stop at 0, so if you screw this one up, it's not a big deal. You will end up screwing this one up anyways, so we'll have to pay attention to that when you put the needle back on, and I'll mention it here in a second. This is basically free-floating. It takes no effort to spin the needle. By needle, I mean the shaft right here that attaches to the servo. So I'll show you. So that needle is now on and attached. You can see when you spin this, there's a hard spot. Well, at least I can feel the hard spot. Right there's the hard spot there. There's the hard spot there. So preferably this one has a servo. This one over here, the supervision does not. So they are a little bit different, but roll with this principle. When you take your needle off, make sure you go straight up. Try not to rotate on accident, because you could have it slightly off. When you put it back on, put it in the same exact position. If it's dead over 0, do that. If it's ever so slightly biased, do that. RPM is going to be stepper driven as well. Put it over top, exactly the same spot as you had it. As long as you lift straight up and straight down, you should be fine. Same with coolant, same with fuel. So what I'd recommend is pull your needles off, and then this black piece right here, this little gauge face, grab an edge by these little pins. There's 2 alignment pins on each one. Grab the edge by the little pin, get your finger on it, and go down to the bottom. You're going to need the bottom first. Go down to the bottom and push down a little, ever so slightly here, and push up. And there's a little tab right there that hooks in. So you're going to push up to release that tab and go to this one, and you're good to go. So take that off. Underneath here, there's your ridges again. You're going to remove those ridges. Now, for the big ones, I took a pair of pliers. They're kind of like wide needle nose pliers. And you can actually grab that edge and just twist, and it just rips off. You can also take a Dremel and get rid of that edge, and it just make it flush. There's plenty of room between needle size in there, so it's not like you're gonna mess anything up. So get rid of that edge, and then that'll allow that red to bleed through underneath that panel. When you put it back on, if you're watching, there is no longer a spot for this notch to hook in underneath the plastic portion. So it will still go on, and it will still line up because of these pins. There's 2 pins on this one here in these corners. However, on the Supervision, there's a pin here and here. That makes it so some dingbat at the factory can accidentally hook them up wrong with the wrong clusters. So put your pins on. There's another pin over here. Put your pin on, and it will line up still. However, it won't necessarily hook because usually it hooks around these circles. What I would do, and what I did do, is figure out where I apparently put it. I must have ate it or something. There it is. Take some E6000. E6000 is similar to silicone. And just put a little dot in a couple of spots. You know, here, 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 here. This thing is not going to seat anything. When you put your trim cover back on, it holds most of this down anyways. But put a couple dots on there. Take your Yoo-hoo. Put it on like so. Then take your needles. Realign them like they're supposed to be. Press it down. Now when you press it down, I've noticed, at least, you may not feel it on yours depending on how hard you press. There's 2 clicks. For me, at least, it seems to drop a little and then go farther. So, for instance, I'll put it on. Maybe. Put it on, it goes down. And then it goes the rest of the way. So, once you do your 2 clicks, then you're good. I'm messing with this one because this cluster is no longer going to see a car. This is my little experimentation cluster. So get your needles back on, and then before you put the clear cover back on, because you'll have to remove that, there's a couple of tabs around the outside edge that just pops the black and clear off, which is this piece. There's some tabs around the outside edge. Just unclip those and it pops right off, no problem. Before you put that on, I would go back to the car, hook it up, make sure everything looks the way you like it. The red will obviously look a little different once you put that tinted plastic clear cover on and your trims and stuff like that. So put that back on after you've checked it out in the car to make sure it's, you know, to your likings and such. How to revert back, there's really not much of a choice. If it was me, I would 3D print a ring and then put it back on there, but I'm really not that concerned about it. It looks good. I'll post a picture, hopefully in the thread where I post this video link, so that you can see what it looks like now. Prior to, I was putting the needles on halfway so that you got a partial bleed, but I like this method a little better. It's a little more in depth, being that I only drive in sport mode, and then one of my favorite colors is red. I really like the color. The camera doesn't really do it justice, so give it a chance to check it out. You can do the half needle mod first, so basically instead of pushing it all the way down 2 clicks, you just push it down 1, put it in the car, turn it on, see if you like where it's heading. If you want more red, go ahead and do it. The fuel in the coolant has a little bit more of a glow to it, and that is because you've got these silver rings, these little trim rings here, that seem to give it a little emanation. That's not probably a word, but it gives it that glow in that, and it somewhat gives it a little more character and places to reflect off of and makes it highlight. When you put the other cover on there, it's black. That trim ring on the outside is black, so you're really not going to get a lot of reflection off of it. Another mod that you can do, and I did this on my other one, these silver rings actually pop off. There's little clips. They're just little teeny tiny things. You just push them together ever so slightly when you're pushing out. There's one there. So there's 4 total. And that will actually come right out. All you gotta do is separate this clear plastic from the black with some more tabs, just like the other one. And then you can take those rings out, and you can paint them a different color. You can paint them hot pink, purple, blue, whatever suits your soul. When I did this cluster originally, I did them in paint matched Snow White Pearl to match the car. I'll be putting those Snow White Pearl rings back on this new Supervision cluster because it stands out a lot better inside the dash. The silver ones just kind of blend in. These rings, on the other hand, although I would like them to be white, I'm not going to probably do it because there's little clear spots in the middle there that allow that red light to come through, or white light, I believe it's white, just to give you a little more idea as to where the different levels are: full, empty, middle. This is what I was talking about. You can see it moves very, very easily, and then when it gets to the bottom, it stops. It doesn't have a stop point. It's probably a PWM driven. This one, on the other hand, which is the more basic cluster, it feels, yeah, it's a stepper. I can feel the steps. This one's stepper driven. It's a little different. Another thing that's different is the non-GT cluster has a very long barrel on the needle. However, I don't have one at the moment. The one on the GT cluster, the 3.5 has long barrels. The Supervision has short. They're kind of like that long. So if you put those on there, you'll really have a lot of glow because they don't sit anywhere near flush. But that is really the gist of it. If you wanted to really get into it, you can go in and remove these SMD LEDs in your rings to switch them out with a different color. They're white, so they're somewhat high on the resistance channel. These are in series. I reversed them a little bit. They're in series. They're driven by some transistors in each corner. The center ones around the needles are red. You can't, you could. I was going to swap colors just to, see what I could do with them. But being that this section here is red, I have a feeling that the cross bleed between colors really is not going to look very good. The only color that would really work is red, but I feel like having red from 8 to 0 would just be too much. It just looked kind of silly. Same with this side. It just kind of looked like that real cheap old school clusters that, I don't know, they just don't have a lot of tone to them. So that is something you could mess with if you wanted to do so, assuming you can do a little surface mount. They are, let's see, I think 3228s. I do believe they're 3228 LEDs. So if you decide to do that, You can also change out some of your warning light markers. You can make your high beam a different color if you wanted to. Your check engine light could be a different color if you have that on a lot. Maybe you're catless and you just want it to be a better color. You could do that. Here's a quick look at the back of the displays. You can see this one is flat. Now this has a single PCB, single layer, in terms of the architecture being just one single layer. On this one, on the other hand, this one has a double layer, and when I say double layer, I mean there's two boards, not that it's a multi-layer PCB, because these are both multi-layers. You can see the raised bump there. They actually, more or less, to keep it simple, they took the center section of the smaller, which has all the microprocessors and everything else, and they actually like cut the board out and raised it, and then put the screen where that part of the board would usually be. The screen is massive. The screen's like this wide and that tall. It's like a tablet in there. It's almost, let's see if it is. I think it may actually be the dang near same screen as this one. I do have the screen number, and it may very well be. This is the 7-inch basic 7-year-old tablet, the ugliest screen in the world. I'm pretty sure that actually might be the same screen panel. They are both LG screen panels. I have the part number for it, and I think they are the same. So I guess if you ever had a spare, there's a spare for you. Granted, I think the coder might be different because it does have an onboard versus an offboard, but that is pretty much it. It's pretty straightforward. It's going to be most beneficial probably to people that already have the instrument cluster out, that are getting it recoded or putting a supervision in a GT. If you decide to buy a supervision cluster and send it to me to have it variant coded and change the mileage, and you want to put it in your GT to look cool, few things to note. I do not, and I've seen this so far, a couple of examples have been given to me. There is, I think it's the GTS, has a supervision screen, but it does not have the boost, oil temp, and torque value in the display pre-programmed. The way that these are programmed, there's a lot of security that is in the way that it won't let you get into nothing. So I have not been able to get in to figure out if this still has the hard coding in it to be able to switch over, and it just activates via a key, sort of like variant coding. If somebody wants to, and this wouldn't be a cheap endeavor, but it's for somebody that wants to, of course, if they have a GTS cluster that they can take out of their car. Now, by GTS cluster, if I'm correct, it is one without the torque value, oil temperature value, and boost value in the gauge, but you do have the supervision. If somebody wants to send me one of those, I can try to flash over the program software from this one, which would be a supervision with those things, over into moving the binary over into the GTS, assuming that it doesn't have that, and see if it is pre-programmed in there and they just don't unlock that portion of the coding, and we can see if that works. As for that as well, I do not know that 2.0s are able to use a supervision cluster with the boost, torque, and temp values inside of it. I do not know that it is able to use that. So if you decide to buy one to do that, you're kind of playing your own game. It's not a huge deal, honestly, because let's say you buy one, you put it in your base model 2.0, and it doesn't work. You can guaranteed sell these clusters as long as it's not beat up and it still works. You could sell the cluster to pretty much anybody. They'll buy it because people want them. We obviously know how to modify them now. We can get them to work, and they're pretty much, they hold their value. If you bought it for $350, you're going to be able to sell it for $350, plain and simple. So it's not a huge deal as long as you don't damage it and as long as you don't break it somehow, in terms of breaking the software, not damage and break. You should be able to resell it no problem. I don't see why the 2.0 wouldn't have the same values in it. Being that the boost gauge goes all the way up to 40 and not 20, because obviously 20 on the GT would not exceed the stock values, it makes me wonder if maybe the diesel version and the 2.0 might have that in other countries, have that torque value and the boost value and the temperature value enlisted in within it, and the wiring harnesses are the same. So it's very well possible that you could swap those over, but like I said, there's just no guarantee. Nobody knows yet. This is all very new to most of us. Usually with the variant coding, you'd have to take it to a dealer. I've just now been able to get into it to change the variant coding. We can turn off lane keep assist, smart cruise control, TPMS if you don't want that anymore. I do believe it does not disable the system, but more so disables the warnings and visual side of things. There's other things in there that I don't want to discuss, because if somebody was able to get into them, it's not a good thing to turn off. But there's a lot of things in there. The electronic suspension, for instance, if you are somebody that is savvy with being able to take apart a car, if you're able to pull apart the dash, instead of paying $300 or $400 to get the electronic cancelers for your suspension, I think they're $300 or $400. You could send the cluster to me and I can shut that off for you. Base fee at the moment is $75. If for some reason things start becoming more expensive, like shipping becomes outweighed, time becomes outweighed, which time to me, it's not a big deal. It's really not that hard to do the coding. I've got the harnesses, I've got everything hooked up. So I can pretty much straightforward plug and play, start the coding, get the variants in, and we're good to go. More or less, we're getting there. But if you wanted to turn off the ECS so that you don't have the light for the suspension, we can do that. Mileage adjustment, I want to touch off on this just a little bit. There's a lot of legality that surrounds mileage adjustment. There's nothing that stops you from going on eBay and buying a cluster with less mileage and just putting it in, calling it a day. So anybody that gets a little high horsey about me changing mileages for people as being a bad thing, it's not impossible for somebody to just go and do that on their own. However, if you were to contact me, send me a cluster and say, hey, oh yeah, my car's got 17,000 miles and it really has 25, you will never get me to program it. Even if you literally said my car has 25 or my car has 17, you're not going to get it to work, because on the day that I receive the cluster, as I go to program, I will send you a message to verify your mileage, and you will have to post a picture of your current cluster and a code that I send you written down so that I can see the absolute current mileage. We're not doing any of the silly date crap where you just go and you could take a picture of 5 or 6 days. People need to be honest, and I just can't trust that everybody will be honest. So at that time, if your mileage is 5,000 miles, you'll take a picture of your cluster saying 5,000 miles and a code that I will send you at that time so I can verify that it is your car and it is your mileage. And then I will program your new one to 5,000 miles plus 100. So if you had 5,000, you will receive it with 5,100 miles. That is because if you decide to drive your car before putting the cluster in, I'm giving you a 100-mile variable so that you can line it up. Instead of lining it up over thousands of miles with some random eBay cluster, you then have 100 miles. Now, if you do not drive the car, and you will not drive the car, because after the cluster leaves me, I am reprogramming a cluster. It has nothing to do with a car. This is a cluster. If you sent me a cluster, I'm putting a number on a cluster. It has nothing to do with a mileage. They are not VIN locked. Therefore, they have nothing to do with me beyond that point. And I've got myself protected on the back end if you try to commit fraud. That is on you, and your state will flag you faster than you can even breathe. So, once we've got that set, I can give you a 100-mile variable standard in case you need to drive your car. Now, if you do not need to drive your car whatsoever, then we don't have to worry about that. and we can keep the mileage the same. If you put the cluster in, let's say this has 5,000 miles and your car had, let's say, 4,900 and you drove over 100 miles before putting the cluster in, you have a very, very good chance of your ECU becoming flagged, because it'll see a mismatch between the data on this and the data on that in terms of mileage. I do believe there's a key code that holds a snap of the mileage in the ECU and then compares it to this within a tolerance. I think the tolerance is 40 miles. So, on the fraud side of that, no worries. So, we'll have that covered front to back, trying to do people a service that is helpful. It's extremely well priced, considering I'm just trying to make the community better, being able to put your own, GT2 cluster in there that looks a lot better. Us poor GT people, they're just ugly. I don't know why they put those in there to begin with, but that sums up the red, gives you a little detail on where we're heading with some other programming and stuff. I'm still working on some coding. I'm going to try to mess with it a little bit more. I'm going to try to see if I can mod a few things that I would like to see different, but these aren't like Androids where you just got to look for some random file that has all the information in it and just go ahead and delete it. There's unfortunately a lot of security on it. Kia was not skimping when they went ahead and did that. So that is what I'll do in terms of the coding and stuff, and you can keep up with updates and stuff on the channel. I'll post up random there and on the forums. But if you do the red, quick gist, pull the needles off, get rid of your white ring, put the needles back on, and you should be good to go. I would test it in the car before you put the clear cover back on. You can plug it in without removing the battery cable. Check out the color, see what you like about it. You can put the needles halfway on if you like it or don't like it. Put the needles back on proper all the way down and put the thing back together, call it a day. But if you like the color red, this is probably your mod. So enjoy.